Hello everyone. Super excited to welcome you to a new episode of the Promcast Drums, the podcast of AI, security, and actually everything in between. Actually, and sadly, this is the last episode of season one of Promcast, where we had multiple industry experts like Mandy, Andres, the current CISO of Elastic, Walter Adok, AI governance expert and founder of StakeAware. We also had Danny Portman, which is the VP of Gen AI at Zeta Global. Gary Mayer from Fintova Partners, which we talked a little bit more about the financial vertical intersecting with AI. And we had plenty of fascinating episodes on essentially the impact of AI on different verticals and industries. Today, I'm super excited. I've been waiting for it a lot to share the microphone with none other than James Berthoty, which I probably misspelled his last name, but you will excuse me. You definitely know if you are in the cybersecurity. I think you've seen him actually everywhere. He's on LinkedIn, he's on Twitter. You can find him in any place, unless you've been living in a cave for the past couple of years. Anyhow, James, welcome to Promcast, and great to have you for this end of season, end of year episode. We are almost on Christmas and New Year's. And firstly, I'd love to share more with our audience about Latio Tech and what you are building. Actually, I think after spending years as a security practitioner and architect, you are now finally building a trusted resource, which I personally very appreciate for both cloud and application security, combined from plenty of product comparison. Also, by the way, shameless plug, Prompt Security is now top rated as an LLM security vendor, so it makes me even more excited. But maybe we can start from it. Sounds good. Maybe you will tell us a little bit more about Latio.
Yeah, for sure. So unlike many of the prestigious other guests on here, I was just a security engineer, and I still refer to myself as a security engineer first and foremost. I came in from like sys engineering into cloud ops, DevOps stuff, into security, and so that is my bias towards everything. Is when I started running application security scanners, I was like shocked that nothing seemed to happen and that it was full of false positives, and I wanted to figure out how to get stuff done. And as part of that journey, it was just such a struggle to find engineering focused resources on stuff like SCA scanning, SAS scanning, Kubernetes security, all of this stuff. And so Latio was born out of just trying to share my personal notes from evaluating CNAP vendors, especially where they get thrown this giant Gartner spreadsheet of like 15 gajillion things, and they all say, yes, we do all of them, and nobody validates or verifies any of it. And they're all really built for pretty different things. And so really a lot of my goal with
We are
Latio,
the complete platform for everything.
that's right. We are the all-in-one. If you have a computer, we are the solution for it. And so it's really just meant to be a useful tool for engineers to get an idea of what companies are emphasizing is half of it, and then the other half is like objective assessments around we have to try to compare these vendors somehow, as much as it's painful to do so, because most like vendors are trying to do good work, they're making security better, but we only have budget to get one of them. And so it's trying to help people make that decision around what's best for them, as opposed to this nebulous magic quadrant thing that's like, hey, Microsoft is the best one. It's like, okay, like, sure. So yeah, that's Latio
Cool.
Tech.
And what's your methodology for doing so?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit. I prefer hands-on time. I think a lot of the issue with analyst firms is that they have to try to be too objective, in the sense of everyone is a person with an opinion and biases. And if we can lean into that, it's a lot more helpful information than this like spreadsheet that someone filled out and manipulated anyways, but we're pretending that didn't happen. And so I'm very upfront with, like, just use ASPM as an example. Like, I love the all-in-one scanning approach to ASPM. I think that's super dope. I think that's great, because I care about like just results, getting all these scans done. I understand why an enterprise would maybe prefer like a point solution scanner that's like best of breed, SCA, blah blah blah, like super whatever. Um, but I'm always trying to like leave my biases out for just the kinds of tools that I prefer versus others. So that's half of it. And then the other half is just actually doing assessments with the way that any security engineer would have to do on their own, when they're buying a tool. So like if you're evaluating SCA scanners, like you're going to plug in a test repo, you're going to do a proof of concept to make sure that it works, that it's scalable, how much were you able to remediate. And so just doing that to get a sense of uh, what are the actual strengths and weaknesses of the different platforms, as opposed to they all have pipeline scanning. Okay, well, there are huge differences in what that means depending on the methodology. So
Mhm. Cool. And I really recommend you guys to have a look and dive into the recommendation and blogs and collateral over there. I think it's a very recommended resource and also very practical. I think you're taking into account the trade-offs of, we all want the best of breed solution, but we have one budget and we need it to be integrated with other solution. So the decision is not always technical and security per se.
yeah,
We need to combine also business and priorities and budget. And I think you have a more, I would say, reasonable approach to compare those.
yeah, and I always want to leave the ultimate decision on the buyer, in the sense of like I'm just trying to help give you information that's relevant to you to help make that decision. I'm not trying to say here's the AI security tool that is always the best one that you should buy no matter what, for example.
Yeah, yeah, tend to agree. Okay, so that was Latio. Maybe we can talk a little bit about 2024 and how was it for AI and security? I think that in terms of like AI adoption, it was kind of crazy. You obviously cover yourself lots of different categories. My life is purely AI and LLM security. You are touching CSPM, it's in CNAP and AppSec and WAPS and whatever not. So you have, I would say, a more broader view. Is there anything in particular that stands out for AI security? And I can share with you that specifically in security for AI, while I don't underestimate the efforts to create thought leadership and educate the market in any category, it seems like here there was been so much traction with even only trying to understand like the new risks of use of AI, and infosec leaders are trying to understand the impact. Is it
Yep.
DLP? Is it more than that? Our endpoint security is enough, or do we need something else? What is your perspective about that very refreshing landscape?
Yeah, I mean it was a real flood of interest in a way that I haven't seen before. The thing that I go to as surprising is not just like the OWASP top 10 for LLMs, which is obviously like a big thing to happen so fast, but especially like the MITRE traction around LLMs is surprising, because usually those sorts of like exploit mapping things take a lot longer to come out for new technologies. So I think that speaks to the security interest that was around this. Um, I as usual though, I'm always surprised by how basic the use cases start and then get backfilled from that. And so when I first was diving into this category, I think you can probably attest to this from like when we met the first time, like the only thing I cared about is the how do you secure AI calls within applications? Like how do you, when you're making an application for internal use or for external use, like how do you properly make sure that the input is sanitized, that the output's not containing sensitive data? If you're doing RAG, if you're doing agentic calls, like the data that's passing between them, data access, like that kind of very nerdy dev
Prompt
stuff.
injection, all of
Yes,
those.
yes, that kind of stuff. But the market as a whole is a lot more guided not by like hyper technical developer discussions, but by like,
Just tell me who is using ChatGPT.
yes, exactly. And that's why, because but the thing I was surprised by was even before that DLP use case is like, uh, what policies should I use for Gen AI, and like this compliance discussion that even like precurses the DLP discussion. And so all that to say that I think Gen AI is still uh, it's a combination of everyone wants to like be the next whiz. What's the next whiz? Like there's this constant question, and Gen AI seems like a technical opportunity to like do this giant growth thing. So there's a ton of interest from that front, but the actual technology implementation is still so much getting figured out that it's a question of like, do you really mean API security because you're mostly calling like OpenAI's API? Do you really mean DLP because you're worried about your users using ChatGPT? Do you really mean this AI firewall concept, which I don't like the name of, but it's the one we've been given to do like the prompt injection detection and the output sanitization checks? Like we are still figuring out exactly what the big AI security use case is going to be, or if it's some combination of all of these things into a single platform. So.
Mhm. And when we first met, I think you've told me that essentially you are only interested in the AppSec angle, the firewall, if we are using this terminology,
Yes.
which I don't really like as well. The prompt injection protection, input output sanitization, etc. While most of, I would say, my competitors and the other new entrants in the market basically touched upon the DLP side, visibility of shadow AI and policy enforcement. And you kind of told me, man, this is not very refreshing. This is not very motivable. And I was totally aligned with you on theory, but in practice, I see traction only growing and interest only growing. How could you explain it?
Uh, there are all the nothing positive came to mind to say immediately about that, but uh I'm trying to figure out how to make it sound less negative because it's more just that like um security buying patterns are always the same. It is always I have to get visibility and get my policies, then I want to detect malicious activity, and then I want to prevent it. And that basic visibility use case is the starting point for people when they don't understand what the technology is doing, in the sense of like, if someone, if we don't monitor people's Google searches to make sure they're not like including sensitive company information in their Google search, like why would we, if you're, as long as you're opted out of the OpenAI data collection stuff, like why do you care really if sensitive data is going to Chat GPT? Like if they're not training their models, like it's a trust issue with the company. It's not like a
But
technical.
Google is Google. You add one enemy to acknowledge and to accept, and ChatGPT is only the first, player
Right.
among thousands of those Gen AI. So suddenly you cannot accept all of those. And maybe DLP and SaaS security weren't solved problems until recently, and now you cannot ignore it anymore.
Exactly. I mean, and that's where it was really a trust issue with OpenAI more than like a technical issue, is more what I mean, as far as like, that's why it's not interesting to me from like a long-term product perspective, because in the short term we don't trust OpenAI, but if we did, like, why are we monitoring what our people are putting into their ChatGPT search besides to like make fun of them for not coding the way they should be or something? Like the long-term use case I just don't think exists for that piece of the market. But I at no time have faulted, like I've always said on the back of those discussions with people like you saying, I'm interested in the app angle the most. I also realize that's going to be the thing that sells in like 2 to 5 years. It's not the thing that's going to sell right away. Make your stupid browser plugin thing. Everyone's going to buy it because they're going to like, oh, look at all this visibility I'm getting. And I can make sure my employees aren't uploading the sensitive PDFs to OpenAI. I've also just never, the other asterisk on that is there are some industries where DLP is legitimately important, in which case it's like, yeah, that's DLP. Like, we probably shouldn't put military secrets in OpenAI. We should probably have controlled data access use cases around it. So it's not just like totally useless. I mean more from the background of uh, the mass market around either production type stuff or SaaS. tech companies. Like it's not this massive DLP concern. But I get that's where CISOs will start. And that's where most of the conversation will start. And over time, it'll get more into these like cool runtime use cases that I've just been more interested in.
Yeah, definitely in the long run, the bigger tectonic shift is in the new architecture around Gen AI. By the way, this architecture is not yet that clear.
Yeah.
It's a moving target, but a lot of things there are changing. Uh, these, indeterministic characteristics and unstructured inputs and integration for between LLM and tools like APIs and databases. This is a completely different landscape to protect, moving from the network level to what we call the semantic layer, the prompt layer. But yeah, it's a matter of time. By the way, relatively speaking, in the last 12 months, we've seen it growing from almost zero interest to not a negligible percentage. So I think it's not a matter of 3 to 5 years. The pace here with everything related to AI is like nothing we've seen before. But yeah, by the way, last year, I put together a pretty embarrassing and a bit cynical predictions for 2024. One of the bullets I've shared is that I was expecting organization to go all in on Gen AI applications. And I think we've started to see it, but are we even close, do you think, to the peak of this curve? Or we only started?
I mean, I think it's to say something positive about Gartner, which is rare. I think the hype cycle curve is which I don't even know if they invented the curve itself. Like I think it is the natural tendency of things where like I think we hit peak like fluff Gen AI implementation of like, oh look, we did a chatbot. Like
By the way, it's from behavioral science. They just took it from there. But the concept is true for many patterns in life, in science. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the like everybody's board was asking, what are you doing with AI? Every CEO had to come up with an answer. It was usually like, how do we get a chatbot into our product? They did that. Nobody's using it. It kind of exists. That's great. So I think we went past that initial hype, and now we're into the people who have continued to stick with it and not just like, oh, we did our dumb feature. What's the next gimmick we can try to raise funding around? But the people who have built like actual agentic architectures are starting to be able to deliver some really high quality product results that show the long-term impact that it's going to have within applications. Since I spent a lot of time in like the application security side, like there is some very cool SAST auto fixing stuff, some very cool code analysis that's happening that wasn't good enough when it was just the old architecture of like, let's send all of the code, which is my little Latio AI scanner, which is fun, like just sends the changed file to OpenAI and says like, hey, is there a security issue? But when you start passing different questions between different agents and say like, what files are impacted? What are the changed files? Like, do you see these functions in any of these files? You can come up with some really cool outputs as a result of that. And so I think that's the part where we haven't hit the peak is there will be some sort of agentic Gen AI component of most applications because it's just too useful in that way. But I don't think it's gonna like take over applications or we're all gonna live in Sam Altman's brain or something. Yeah.
Maybe Anthropics. Yeah.
Yep.
That was, by the way, one of the other items I've shared. I thought that OpenAI's monopoly is going to be fragmented. Do you think this is something we've started to see, or still they rule these realms?
I think it's gonna almost entirely come down to I'm actually gonna back up. I was gonna say that it was gonna come down to the code stuff, like because so much of it's sort of like people choose operating systems based on like who their nerdy friends like. I think people will choose ChatGPT type solutions based on who their nerdy friends like. And so I think Claude having better code benchmarks did so much for Anthropic that that by itself drove a huge amount of interest to a product that otherwise um, is not like as consumer usable as Chat GPT, if that's the primary goal. Um, but I don't uh, it seems to me like OpenAI is in a great position to continue to be the leader and is basically synonymous with this stuff. The big trend that I'll say I've seen is that people are 100% using uh, outsourcing their models to API players. I've seen almost no successful scalable implementations of people baking their own like Llama 3
Likewise.
implementation, and that's how they've built their own crazy thing, which I would have predicted that to be the case because I've been at some places where like I feel like everywhere I've worked has had some nebulous team of like ML ops, data science, PhDs and data stuff. And like there's never quite been like a here's the product
ROI
outcome.
is really
Yes.
limited.
Yeah. Because it's like they're trying, it's like five people trying to build OpenAI from scratch with only the company's data. And I think that's why
No, but you have that vision always that OpenAI's GPT is like a Swiss knife that solves everything. But if you would take one of those
yeah.
better open sources and you refine it and fine tune it on your use case and data, then it might be better with better latency, with better accuracy. But apparently, 99% of the times, this is a waste of money, energy, human resources, salaries. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's I'll have a report on like the state of code auto fixing coming out soon. And I mean, that's a lot of what I'm seeing from like just preemptive testing of different attempts people have made to build the solutions is like the third party APIs are good. And like that's probably the right way to go rather than trying to bake your own stuff.
Definitely not. The new ones are not 10x better. And this is
Right.
what being demanded for people to move from ChatGPT to some startups AI tool for fixing code, right?
Yeah, and it's the thing that I would have been wrong about was I thought the token window was going to be the thing that would really drive adoption. Where like I remember when Gemini said that they were increasing it to like 1 million or something, um, that we would have just sent. Okay, what if I don't tell the AI like here's the change pieces of code, figure out the issue, but I just send it the entire code base and then say like find the issues. But I think that just doesn't perform as well because it doesn't it's too broad. It tries to over summarize and things like that. And so that's why I think the agentic approach has proven to be really strong. And I've just seen some really cool stuff come out of it. So I've been surprised by how cool it is.
Mhm. We touched a little bit around, the analysts' paradigm on this market. Gartner has, for example, I love that laugh. Gartner has, for example, the AI tourism category, which was invented before the Gen AI storm. Now, some companies are starting to speak about AI SPM, as some sort of a derivative of CSPM designated for AI. In practice, I see most of the companies and buyers concerned about either DLP or WAF for AI. So combining it all together, how would you define the new categories created by AI? Which one are the most, you think, crucial ones, timely ones?
Yeah, I mean, I love thinking about these categories because I've been so I believe in cybersecurity, you can either make tools around like technologies, like we secure Kubernetes, we secure AWS, we secure AI, or like even more granularly like OpenAI or something, or you can make it around like buckets of use cases, which is more the platformy play. And so categories are just really fascinating to me in general, in the sense of like how do you decide which one gets to be a category or not. But in general, I think AI security should be the category. Like at the end of the day, there's companies that are either focusing on AI security exclusively, or it's a feature within, like they happen to detect some piece of the overall story. And so basically, I just think there should be one category that's AI security, and it's for companies like Prompt that are focusing exclusively on this problem. And then everything else kind of filters into a feature, right? So if you're like a GRC platform, like AI Trism is something that like you just, it's a set of policies around AI stuff. AISPM is just like you do agentless vulnerability scanning, and now you happen to pick up models based on file paths. And it's like, okay, now we do AISPM, I guess. So I think all these different platforms have AI as a feature, but if you really want to take AI security seriously, then like here's the list of providers that are doing just that. Um, that's how I currently separate it, but it does have some of the same challenges that identity has as a category, because just like with AI, every single major platform has a button that says identity on it, but they're all doing different things when they say identity. And in the same way, every single platform is going to have a button that says AI on it, but it's going to be very different things.
Interesting. And that's a good segue, I guess, for some posts you've shared over LinkedIn. I think you shared there that you think at the moment that AI is probably an important enough category for an average company. And if this company wants to address it, then if you needed to choose between those big incumbents features for AI security or partnering with a designated vendor for AI security, you would go with the latter. What is your logic behind it?
Yeah, I think to me it comes down to how important is AI to what you're doing. So I think of this like I had a really eye-opening conversation with a medical device provider around AI security, and for them they were deploying IoT devices like right now that use LLMs to give medical feedback and assistance and stuff. Like for that company, all of a
Sounds
sudden,
sensitive.
yeah, it understands like this is a real product right now. It needs to, all those little biases things that I don't like, how is that a security issue? I don't really care. Well, if you put it in a doctor's office, like all of a sudden it makes sense why you don't want the output to be like insane or tampered with or poisoned in some way. Like it ups the ante on all of that stuff compared to like my personal hands-on experience, like with PagerDuty Copilot stuff. Like uh, the the stakes just aren't as high for like how do we identify potential biases that might exist in the model or something. Like the just the stakes of the use case determine how seriously I need to take this issue. And that's why for me it's like if I'm somewhere that just has a chatbot, I'm probably not going to buy like an AI security solution. And so that's what I meant with the one hand where it's like for me, like I can just use like AISPM as part of my CNAP, or I can just use like the AI detection features of whatever, and it'll slowly give me a little bit of insight into like, oh, here's what the devs are using to build their models, here where it's deployed, like just giving me a little bit of visibility. But if I have like a full blown thing I need to protect because it's either touching critical data, it's touching personal data that could easily be exploited, it has huge risk profile to it, like I'm not going to just be like, oh, my IoT medical device is secure because I use Wiz's AISPM platform. Like that's just doesn't, it's not at all related to the use case. And so that's why I think AI security is a legitimate category. Is outside of providers like Prompt, I don't know anyone who could even attempt to help with that use case. Um, so yeah.
But I have to ask, do you have the same conclusion regarding other categories like identity or shift left?
I think it speaks to the challenge of those categories. And I do have a similar, not yeah, not shift left, but I early with AI security, I drew a lot of parallels to Kubernetes security in the sense of if I took Kubernetes really, really seriously, I better get a solution like Armo or Rad that is built from the ground up to do Kubernetes security and not like sit around and wait, like praying that maybe one of these agentless CSPMs is going to like catch up to Kubernetes. Because in some ways, a lot of those platforms still have not caught up to very basic Kubernetes security stuff like RBAC visualization. Like somehow that is still like impossible for a lot of companies to do when it's like one of the most important basic things of securing Kubernetes. And in the same way, like that's the parallel to the AI situation is I better not just sit around and wait for like, oh, the Palo Alto AI solution is going to like come and make it so I can secure this random this like really important to secure use case that I have. And identity is a similar thing. It's a little bit harder because it involves more. It's more of like a platform idea where like I still don't know if the market can handle like a separate identity platform
Too
outside of what already.
many touch points and
Yeah,
concepts of identity. Yeah.
yeah. It's I. You can make cool graphs, which I think is like 90% of what sells a security product. And so I've always got that in the back of my head, but uh it is very difficult to say like what kind of it's hard to attach to a budget use case. um it goes back to
Hmm.
the I think in security the hardest things to sell are the things that actually improve security, which is a huge disappointment with like the industry as a whole. But like that's why my favorite part of identity are like ITDR providers, like what Permiso is doing, which is like runtime identity threat detection stuff, because that'll actually tell you like an exploit is happening and here's how they're chaining identities and all of that. But that is way harder to sell than here's a graph of
This
your identities.
identity X is not
Yes.
least privilege.
And
Yeah.
it goes back to this. It's the same thing with this AI stuff where the AI firewall stuff is way cooler, but the thing that's going to sell right now is like the DLP thing. I'm like, okay.
Hmm. But I see them both connected. You can get into the organization
Yeah.
with the simplistic use case that he thinks that he currently needs. And I personally think that he needs it, although I get the impression that this is less groundbreaking than the AppSec angle. And then you grow with them and solve the upcoming challenges around building Gen AI apps and agents. So there is, a thread connecting between them
Yeah.
both.
When it gets back to even because I mentioned Armo and Rad as on the Kubernetes example, like those platforms are now they are not just Kubernetes point solutions. Like they are big cloud runtime, application runtime, like doing a lot of very cool stuff. And it's the similar sort of story where you start in one position helping solve a use case and then just continue to evolve with, who knows if in 2 years we're going to be like, oh, can you believe we used to use agentic architectures? Like that was so stupid. We should just be using one of the things that OpenAI is releasing over this, like whatever Christmas live stream thing they're doing.
12 days.
Yeah,
Yeah.
12 days.
All right. I have a last question for you before we move to the fun part, if I may. Um, can you share with me maybe the biggest misconception around security for AI? Or I would be okay as well with some creative and brave prediction for this category for 2025. So either misconception or prediction, you can choose.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've been like complaining about the misconception the whole time, which is like this DLP thing is like so whatever. Uh I just ChatGPT will be used the same way that Google is used by employees. If you don't care about what your employees Google search, you probably shouldn't care what they put in ChatGPT. Uh, but and this is a big but. If you do care what they Google, which sometimes you do, uh, there are some companies where that does matter. Then you should care about the DLP use case. So that's the I am
Very PC.
yes, there are times where it does matter, and so yeah,
Cool. Anything that I should have asked and I forgot?
I don't think so.
All right. So that's the time to move to the last part of this episode, the fun part. Essentially, a round of fan questions we ask at the end of any episode. You should answer directly, intuitively. Don't think about it too much. Let me know if you are ready, James.
Yes, I'm ready.
All right. The first question. Where were you when ChatGPT was first released?
I don't
We'll
know.
change
At
this
home.
question for season 2 at home.
At,
But do you remember it?
um, I don't know if I can say I remember like the exact thing, but I remember immediately thinking of the little chat bot game where like it'll guess what you're thinking of. Um, and yeah, it was an interesting transition from the idea of complex. There's the famous like little meme that's Like it's AI, and then you take off the covering, and it's a bunch of if-then statements.
If else, yeah.
Yes, that's what I assumed it was, and then I had to learn what graph databases were and all this stuff. So it's been a fun ride.
If you had to choose ChatGPT, Gemini, or Claude, or maybe something else.
I am a simple-minded man, so I will just use ChatGPT is what I use. Uh, it's fun that Google keeps putting. I'm like a Google guy from top to bottom. Like I've got the Gemini and the Homes and all that, or the Pixel and the Homes and all of that stuff. But
Still,
yeah,
it's not trendy as it used to be.
I don't know what else I would do. I feel like it's either that or Apple or Samsung. I'm like, yeah,
I moved to Apple recently.
that's I should now. But I don't know. I'm too much of a video game Androidy person to fully adopt the Mac dev lifestyle.
Yeah, I get you, but you need to acknowledge your defeat in some point of
Yes, I
life.
probably should. Apple, every time I'm in someone's car and they put on Apple CarPlay instead of the Android Auto stuff, I'm like, oh, this is way cooler. But yeah,
Yeah, masters of product.
yep.
Okay, and the last one, if you could fully have AI, artificial intelligence, do your job for you, although you have a pretty cool job today, so it's not the best question to ask you, what would you do instead?
Uh, yeah, I don't know. I would probably finish my PhD finally.
In what?
Philosophy, and then the AI could go teach for me, and then I'd lose that too. I don't know. Petition the government for universal basic income.
Okay, noted. We talked a little bit about Latio, and I think some of the folks who listen to us are kind of interested. How can listeners reach out to you if they would like to get in touch, maybe explore more? What's the best way to do so?
Yeah, I am way too active on LinkedIn, which is very funny because it started as a joke, but here we are. That is probably the easiest way to get in touch with me, but it's just latio.tech, and there's a YouTube, a newsletter. The site is list.latio.tech for the vendor comparison stuff. So all sorts of, there's a Discord as well, which is fine to reach out to me on. So yeah.
I must say, objectively, because I have no participation over there, and I met James for like 2 or 3 times. It's an amazing project, super creative, innovative, objective. And I'm not saying it because Prompt is starring in the LLM security category. Literally, all the leaders in any one of the, how many categories do you have? Plenty of those, right?
I don't know. There's a lot now because the new version of the site I'm excited for because it better differentiates between platforms and categories. Because right now I've got like if someone's in ASPM like Psycode or something, for example, like oh they're in SCA, SAS, DAS, container, IEC. So lots of repetition on some of the AppSec stuff. So
Mm-hmm. So again, if you would like to move away all the messaging, marketing stuff of the vendors, and to get a really in-depth experience of those kind of products, I think you can get a very objective overview from Latio, which is so aligned with 99% of the practitioners' feedback and experience. So super recommended. The domain is latio.tech, right?
yep.
So feel free to reach out, and thanks again, James. Super enjoyed it as usual. Not always the most PC answers or common ones, but definitely one of the most interesting ones. And thank you all, everyone, which tuned into this episode and the entire series of Promptcast. Don't forget to rate and review Promptcast on Spotify and Apple Apple Podcast, etc. And see you very soon in season 2. Take care. Thank you, James.
Thank you.